Imagine waking up tomorrow to headlines screaming, "Country declares bankruptcy." Markets panic, politicians give speeches, experts argue on TV, and you look around and think, but my job is fine, my savings are still there, the shops are open, so what exactly went bankrupt? That uncomfortable gap between your personal finances and your country's is where this story begins. Because here's the truth most people never hear clearly. A country can run out of money even when its people haven't. And when that happens, the consequences don't arrive all at once. They arrive quietly, then suddenly. This matters now because more countries are closer to that edge than they admit. Debt levels are higher than ever. Interest rates are no longer near zero, and the old tricks governments use to buy time are getting expensive. To understand how this works, we need to separate two things that feel similar but are fundamentally different: your finances and a country's finances. You earn money, you spend money. If you borrow too much, eventually the bank cuts you off. Governments don't work like that. They don't have a salary, they don't retire, and they almost never pay off their debt. Instead, they roll it over. Old debt gets replaced with new debt every year, forever. As long as lenders believe the government can keep doing that, the system holds. The moment they doubt it, everything changes. Let's slow this down. When a government runs a budget deficit, meaning it spends more than it collects in taxes, it borrows the difference, usually by issuing bonds. Banks buy them, pension funds buy them, foreign governments buy them. Sometimes the central bank buys them. At first, this feels harmless. Borrowing smooths recessions, funds infrastructure, prevents political pain. But debt has a quiet companion: interest. And interest compounds. Here's the uncomfortable math. If a country's debt grows faster than its economy, the burden increases even if nothing goes wrong. No corruption, no crisis, just arithmetic. For years, this didn't matter much. Interest rates were low, almost artificially low. Governments could borrow trillions and barely feel it. That era is ending. When interest rates rise, old debt doesn't disappear. It gets refinanced at higher costs. Suddenly, a larger share of tax revenue goes to servicing past decisions instead of present needs. Hospitals compete with bondholders. Schools compete with interest payments, and bondholders usually win. This is where the illusion breaks. A country can be solvent on paper, assets, people, businesses, land, but still be unable to meet its short-term obligations. That's not personal bankruptcy. It's liquidity failure. Think of it like owning a house worth $1 million, but missing your mortgage payment because your paycheck came late. You're rich, but you're stuck. Now scale that problem to an entire nation. When investors sense this risk, they demand higher interest rates. That raises borrowing costs, which worsens the problem, which scares investors even more. A feedback loop forms. Governments respond the way governments usually do. They deny, they delay, they promise reforms later. Sometimes they cut spending, sometimes they raise taxes, sometimes they print money. Each option has consequences. None are painless. This is where the illusion between you and your country becomes painfully real. You might still have a job, but public services degrade. Infrastructure ages. Wages lag behind prices. Taxes creep upward in small, forgettable ways. Nothing collapses. Life just becomes thinner. And then there's the irony. Countries don't usually default because they ran out of resources. They default because they ran out of trust. Argentina has fertile land. Greece had productive workers. Sri Lanka had functioning institutions. What they lost was market confidence, the belief that future payments would arrive without drama. Once that belief cracks, borrowing becomes punitive. Emergency loans come with conditions. Policy choices shrink. Sovereignty doesn't vanish overnight. It erodes. There's a quiet absurdity here. The people who feel the pain are rarely the ones who approved the borrowing. Debt is political memory loss, written in numbers. Public messaging often misses this. Governments talk about strong fundamentals, rising GDP, positive growth projections. Those could all be true and still irrelevant, because the real question lenders ask is simpler. Can this government keep refinancing its obligations without panic? If the answer becomes maybe, the countdown starts. And here's the part that's hardest to accept. A country can be bankrupt even if it controls its own currency. Printing money can avoid default, but it introduces another kind of failure: inflation, currency collapse, capital flight. Technically solvent, practically unstable. That's not a loophole. It's a trade trade-off. So when people say a country isn't like a household, they're right. But that doesn't make countries safer. It makes the consequences stranger. Households hit a wall. Countries slide down slopes, slowly at first, then all at once. The long-term risk isn't a dramatic collapse. It's stagnation disguised as normality, a future where growth underperforms, public trust decays, and every crisis hits harder than the last. And most citizens won't connect it to debt. They'll blame politicians or corporations or globalization, rarely the system itself. So here's the unresolved question worth sitting with. If a country's bankruptcy doesn't look like failure, if it doesn't arrive with closed banks or empty shelves, if it shows up instead as permanent pressure, lower expectations, and shrinking choices, how would you even know it had already begun?